Hi, this is Dr. Eddie Morgan over at Clovis East High School, and I want to help you with your homework help for worksheet 1.2. Remember that any problem you're struggling with on homework, if you look to the homework help, you'll see a problem just like it being solved, and you should be able to look at the help problem and then figure out how to do your homework problem. So let's get started. First thing we want to do with any problem that we're solving here is see if we can simplify the expression on either the left or the right side of the equation. Some teachers will actually have you take your line and go to the equal sign and draw a line down it to say, let's look at the left side, then let's look at the right side. See if we can simplify anything before we start doing the operations that involve both sides. We notice on the left side that we have two variables that have the same, two terms that have the same variable. We have 17x and negative 9x. So we can combine like terms. So we're going to combine like terms. That's going to be our first step. The reason we can do this is we can combine like terms. 17x minus 9x, that's like 17 apples minus 9 apples. That's going to leave me with 8 apples. I still have the plus 8, and now that equals 32. All we did was combine terms on one side. We didn't do anything to the other side. But now we have our standard two-step equation. Notice that the x is being multiplied by 8, and then they add 8. So we're going to reverse that process, and we typically undo the addition or subtraction first. So the opposite of adding 8 is to subtract 8. Now, because we're doing that to one side of the equation, we have to do it to the other as well. And this is called the subtraction property of equality. It says if two things are equal and you subtract the same amount from both sides, they'll still be equal. Well, 8 minus 8 is 0, so that goes away, and I'm left with 8x on this side equals 32 minus 8 is 24. Okay? So we've undone one of the operations. Now we'll undo the second. The opposite of 8 times x is 8 divided by x, or x divided by 8. So we'll undo this by dividing this side by 8. 8 divided by 8 is 1. That leaves me x. But whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So 24 divided by 8, and we have our answer is x equals 3. If we wanted to check that out, we could plug it back into the equation. We could say, okay, 17 times 3 plus 8 minus 9 times 3, and let's see what that equals. 3 times 17 is 51 plus 8. 3 times 9 is 27. So if we combine these two, we get 59 minus 27, and 9 minus 7 is 2. And we get the same answer we saw at the beginning, so that way we can check. The thing about equations is you can always plug your answer in and see if you are correct. Problem number 2 looks very much like problem 1, except for the left and the right have simply switched. So our first step is simply to look on both sides of the equation and see if we can simplify either side. So if I just draw a little line here, I recognize 14 is okay, but on the other side I have two like terms. Those are terms that have the same variable component. Notice I have 4m and 2m. So I can combine both of these terms. Combine like terms. And I have 14 equals, and 4m plus 2m, 4 monkeys plus 2 monkeys, is 6 monkeys minus 4. At this point, I should look and say, oh, I'm back to a two-step equation. The variable m is being multiplied by 6, step 1, and subtracting 4, step 2. To solve it, I just undo those two operations. And as we typically do in a two-step, it's easier usually to undo the subtraction first before the multiplication. So the opposite of subtracting 4 is adding 4. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. This is called the addition property of equality. Simply means if you and your friend both have the same amount of candy bars, and I give each of you 2 candy bars, you still have the same amount because I both gave you the same amount. In this case, -4 plus 4 adds up to 0. See how we were trying to get rid of that? 14 plus 4 is 18 equals 6m. So we've undone the subtract 4. Now we have to undo the 6 times m. Well, the opposite of multiplying m by 6 is dividing m by 6. So that's my undoing operation. So we'll undo this by dividing by 6, and we have to do the same to the other side. This is called the division property of equality. And now 18 divided by 6 is 3. And 6 divided by 6 is 1, so that means 3 equals m. Or since they're both equal, we can turn it around and simply write m equals 3, and that's our answer. Right? If you wanted to check this answer, you could again plug it in. I'm going to plug it in on the right side. I'll say, okay, 4 times 3 minus 4 plus 2 times 3. And let's see what that side adds up to. 4 times 3 is 12. Minus 4 plus 2 times 3 is 6. 12 minus 4 is 8. And 8 plus 6 is 14, which is what we had there. So we know we have the correct answer. Our next problem is exactly like problem 1. The variables are on the left side. So first of all, let's see what we can combine or simplify on the left side as opposed to the right side. So notice I have 2 equations, 2 terms that have like terms. -2y and 7y. So -2 plus 7, that's the same as 7 minus 2, so that's 5y. And then plus 4 equals 29. And here we were simply combining like terms. That's the reason we can do this operation, taking terms that are the same. And now we have our 2-step equation. We have y multiplied by 5 and then adding 4. And we typically find it easier to undo the addition or subtraction first. So we're going to undo the plus 4. What's the opposite of adding 4? Subtracting 4. But this time we have to do it to both sides of the equation. So 4 minus 4 is 0. So we have 5y equals 29 minus 4 is 25. And now we're going to undo the 5 times the y. What's the opposite of multiplying y by 5? Dividing by 5. So if I divide by 5 here, notice 5 divided by 5 is not 0, it's 1, which is what I want. I want to find out what y equals to. Because I divided this side by 5, I also have to divide the other. That is the division property of equality. And you'll notice that I just forgot to write on the step above. This was actually the subtraction property of equality. This is the property that allows us to do this operation. Well, 25 divided by 5 is 5, and so our answer is y equals 5. And again, like the other problems, we could plug it back in and see that it works. Problem 4 is very much like problem 2. Notice the variables are on the right side. And once again, we just want to look at the left side and the right side and see if we can combine terms or do distribution or something like that before we start messing with going to both sides. In this case, we notice that there's like terms, 2p and -10p. So I'm going to combine like terms here. You notice that 2p subtract 10p is mean I start with 2, I subtract 10, that's more than the 2 I have, so I end up with a -8p. So I'm going to have 17 equals -8p minus 7. And now we're back to our 2-step equation. The variable p is being multiplied by -8, and then we're subtracting 7. We want to undo the addition or subtraction first, so the opposite of subtracting 7 is adding 7, and we always have to add it to both sides. And this is because of the addition property of equality. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0. That goes away. 17 plus 7 is 24 equals minus 8p. And now we'll undo this operation. Notice that p is being multiplied by negative 8. So the opposite of multiplying times minus 8 is dividing by minus 8. Don't forget the negative sign there. If you just divide by 8, then you end up with negative p. And you'll have to get rid of the negative later anyway. Negative 8 divided by negative 8 is 1. And 24 divided by negative 8, a positive divided by a negative is going to be a negative. So this is going to be negative 3 equals p. We did this because of the division property of equality. And like we did before, number 2, we can simply switch those around and say p equals minus 3. And that is our answer there. If we wanted to check this one, let's take the right side and just plug it in. 2 times minus 3 minus 7 minus 10 times minus 3. Well, a positive times a negative is a negative. So this 2 times negative 3 is going to be negative 6. Minus 7, and then a negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 10 times negative 3 will be 30. Negative 6 minus negative 3 is negative 13 plus 30, and negative 13 plus 30, or if you see it as 30 minus 13, is going to be 17, and you notice that's what the equation said it should equal to, so we know that we got the problem correct. In problem 5, we're once again going to look on either side of the equations and see if we can simplify it. This time when I look at the left side, I don't see terms to be combined, but I see that I have a distributive situation in which 4 is being multiplied by the quantity. Well, in solving solutions, we want to get rid of parentheses. So the way to undo that parentheses is use the distributive property. I take 4 times x and then 4 times minus 3. And so we're going to use the distributive property here. And you notice that I get 4 times x minus 4 times 3, and that's going to equal 16. Okay, so this is simply 4x minus 12 equals 16. And now we're back to our two-step equation. We have the variable x being multiplied by 4 and then subtracting 12. So we undo the addition and subtraction first. So the opposite of subtracting 12 is adding 12. So I'll add 12 here, and I got to do the same to both sides, and that's using the addition property of equality. Negative 12 plus 12 is 0. So I'm left with 4x on this side. 16 plus 12 is 28. So now we need to undo the multiplication. X is being multiplied by 4. The opposite of multiplying by 4, dividing by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is going to leave me 1. And I do the same to the other side. And this is the division property of equality. And my answer is x equals 7. Now notice if we check this out, we just put that in for x. 4 times 7 minus 3, let's see what that side equals. Well, we do the parentheses first. So 7 minus 3 is 4, so I end up with 4 times 4, or 16. And that's what that equaled there, so I know I did that problem correctly. Problem 6 is exactly like problem 5, except for they have exchanged the left and the right side. So when I look at the left or right side to see if there's anything I can do, I notice, oh, I have 6x here. I want to get rid of the parentheses, and I'll use the distributive property to eliminate the parentheses. So the first thing we're going to do on the right side is use the distributive property. So I have 6 times x plus 6 times 2. 6 times x, 6 plus 2. So I end up with 36 equals 6x plus 12. Okay? So now we have our two-step equation. We have x being multiplied by 6 and then adding 12. We want to undo both operations, and we find it easier to undo the addition first. So the opposite of adding 12 is subtracting 12. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. This is the subtraction property of equality. So 12 minus 12, that's what we wanted to eliminate. And we end up with 36 minus 12 is 24 equals 6x. And now we'll undo the multiplication. X is being multiplied by 6. The opposite of multiply by 6 is divide by 6. So we divide both sides by 6. That's the division property of equality. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 24 divided by 6 is 4. So I end up with x, 4 equals x, or I can turn that around and write x equals 4 as my answer. Once again, we can go to the right side and see if it works. I have 6 times 4 plus 2. 4 plus 2 is 6. We always do the parentheses first. So we have 6 times 6 is 36, and that's what we had up there. So we know we've done the problem correctly. Problem 7 is much like problem 5. The only real difference is they put a negative here to see if you would get confused by a negative sign, but we won't. We notice again as we look at the left and the right that we don't have any like terms to combine, but we do have this parentheses that we want to eliminate, and we do that by using the distributive property. That means we're going to distribute the multiply by minus 5 to both things inside. So we're going to take the minus 5 times the y. So I have minus 5 times y plus minus 5 times 3. And that, of course, still equals minus 20. Well, minus 5 times y is minus 5y. Minus 5 times 3 is negative 15. So I'll write subtract 15 equals minus 20. At this point now we have a two-step equation. The variable is being multiplied by negative 5 and then subtracting 15. So we typically undo the addition or subtraction first. So the opposite of subtracting 15 is adding 15. Right? The 15 minus 15 is 0. That's what we wanted to get rid of. We're using this time the addition property of equality. So we're left with minus 5y on this side, that goes to 0, equals negative 20 plus 15 is negative 5. Now we have negative 5 times y. The opposite of multiplying by negative 5 is dividing by negative 5. Do not forget that we want to get rid of the negative 2, so we divide by negative 5. And this is the division property of equality. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. We're left with y on that side. And again, negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. So our answer is 1. You may want to check this out because of the negatives. The most common mistake students make is dropping negatives and making mistakes. So let's try it out. Let's look at the left side and see what we got. We have minus 5, and we put in 1 for y plus 3. Well, 1 plus 3 is 4, so minus 5 times 4 is going to be negative 20, and that's what that was. So we do have the correct answer. Problem 8 is actually a combination of the previous problems. We're going to both use the distributive property to get rid of these parentheses, as well as you combine terms after we get done, because we got a couple of in terms here. So let's start with the distributive property. We use this to get rid of the parentheses. So I have my n here, but then I have plus 3 times n. So 3 times n, and then the minus, and then again the 3 times the 4. and that's all going to equal 8. We were only working with the left side of the equation. So let's simplify that. N plus 3n minus 3 times 4 is 12 equals 8. Now we notice that we have two like terms, n and 3n. Well, just remember that this n is not a 0n, it's like this. It's really a 1n plus 3n. Well, 1 plus 3 is 4n minus 12 equals 8. Okay, so this was simply combining like terms. Now we have our two-step equation. The variable n is being multiplied by 4, and then we subtract 12. So we undo the addition or subtraction first. So the opposite of subtracting 12 is adding 12. And we have to do that to both sides because that is the addition property of equality. So we have 4n, 12 minus 12 plus 12 is 0, that goes away, equals 8 plus 12 is 20. Now we're going to undo the operation 4 times n. The opposite of n being multiplied by 4 is n being divided by 4. And again, we do it to both sides, and this is the division property of equality. 4 divided by 4 is 1. Notice we're not getting 0n, we're getting 1n. And 20 divided by 4 is 5. And so our answer is n minus 5. Now, if we want to track that all the way through and see if we were right, we could plug them in back up here. So n is 5. So I could write 5 plus 3 times 5 minus 4 and see what that equals on the left side. Well, 5 minus 4 is 1. So I end up with 5 plus 3 times 1, or I end up with 8. And that's what we had there, so we know we got the answer correct. Problem 9 shows us a solution to one equation that was done by one student in which there's an error, and it wants us to describe where the error is. Now, if you start off with the equation, one of the things the student did that was very smart was they didn't like fractions. So they said, let's get rid of the fractions, and one way to do that is to multiply everything by the common denominator of the fractions. In this case, both fractions have a 5, so if I multiply everything by 5, that's a good thing to do, and that's exactly what they did. And so in this case, you're going to multiply 5 times this. We got to distribute it now. So I'm going to have 5 times 2x divided by 5 minus 5 times 1 equals, and in this case I can simplify this, 5 divided by 5 is 1, so this is simply going to equal 3. And here's where the problem comes in. If I do this, notice these 5's go to 1 and I'm left with 2x, but 5 minus 1 is negative 5 equals 3. And you notice that's where the problem comes in if I look over here. What they did is they multiplied the 5 times there, but they forgot to multiply the 5 times there. A very common mistake for new math students. When you distribute, you multiply it by everything in the parentheses, and that was the mistake they made. So if we want to finish it, now the opposite of subtracting 5 is adding 5. Addition property of equality, that's 0, and I end up with 2x equals 8. And now we undo 2 times x by dividing by 2, and we find out that the correct answer is 4. And if we put that back in, it was work. Whereas if we put back in the x equals 2, you would discover that that does not work. Problem 10 is a word problem. Let's read it together and notice the important ingredients in the problem. 3 friends are going bowling. The cost per person per game is $5.75. So they're each going to have to pay $5.75 just to bowl. And then the cost to rent shoes is $2.50 per person. And their total cost is $76.50. We want to know how many games did they play. So first off, let's make a variable for this. How many games? I'm going to let the variable g equal the number of games they played. All right, so that's how many they find. So let's think about how much did this all cost. First of all, there's 3 people, and they each paid $5.75 per game. So that means I'm going to have 3 people, and they're going to pay $5.75 per game. But then I don't know how many games, so I'm also going to multiply that by G. So 3 times $5.75 is how many they all would have to do to roll 1 game. But if they do 2 games, this doubles. Then they have to rent shoes. Well, again, there's 3 of them, so they each pay $2.50. But if you've ever been bowling, you know you don't rent the shoes per game. You just rent it per activity. So there's no G involved there. And that all added up to $76.50. So there's our equation. 3 times $5.75 times the number of games they played plus 3 times the $2.50, and that all added up to $76.50. So let's just solve this. 3 times $5.75. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 is 22, carry the 2. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 is 1725G, plus 3 times 250. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 6 plus 750 equals $76.50. Now, if you look at this closely, you recognize we just simply have a 2-step equation. The number of games is being multiplied by 17.325 and then adding 750. So we undo the addition first by subtracting 750 from both sides of the equation. That's going to go away, and so I have 17.25G equals $69. So that's how much it costs for, outside. Once we get rid of the shoes, it costs them $69 to do that. So now we're going to undo this equation. 17.25 times the number of games. So we undo the multiplication by dividing by 17.25 both sides. This becomes the number of games. And so I'm going to take my calculator and do this. 69 divided by 17.25, and I find out that G equals 4 games. Obviously, if I get an answer that's not a whole number, I know I did something wrong, because bowling alleys don't let you bowl 3.5 games or something like that. So the answer here is 4 games. Our last problem is a geometry problem, and is based upon what you see in the hint that says that the sum of the angle measures of a quadrilateral, which means a 4-sided figure, is 360 degrees. So that means the sum of each of these angles adds up to 360. So let's just write them down. I'll start here with 3x. I have 3x. And remember, when you see this little square in the corner, that means it's a right angle, which is 90 degrees, plus 75 degrees, plus this number, 2x plus 15, equals 360. Now, if we looked on the left side, we just have a lot of numbers that we can combine. For example, I can combine the x terms, 3x plus 2x, and I end up with 5x plus 90 plus 75 plus 15 equals 360. And now we just combine them. I happen to notice that I can combine these two rather easily. 75 plus 15 is going to give me another 90. And then 90 plus 90 is 180. And now we're down to our 2-step equation. So we always undo the addition or subtraction first. So let's subtract 180. And we end up with 5x. This is 0, of course. 360 minus 180 is 180. And now we undo, what's the opposite of multiplying by 5? Divide by 5. And again, we have to do it to both sides of the equation. And 5 goes into 180. $36 times. And so our answer is 36. X is 36 will give us our correct answer. All right, great job on your. I hope you do well on your homework tonight.